I never imagined I'd return from caring for my daughter to find heavy machinery tearing through the heart of my family's farm. But that's exactly what happened. While I was out of state helping Emily recover from surgery, the Pine Crest HOA, led by the ever-smug Rebecca Winters, decided to cut straight through my eastern fields with a tourist train track. No warning, no permission. Just steel rails where rows of sweet corn had stood for generations. My grandfather, Walter Miller, built this farm after coming home from World War II. Every fence post, every plank of that old red barn still carries his fingerprints. He taught me that land isn't just dirt. It's memory. It's sacrifice. It's family. For 80 years, we've tended these fields. Now, all that history meant nothing to Pine Crest, just an inconvenience standing in the way of their manicured vision. The trouble had been brewing for years. Pine Crest sprouted up around us like a weed, cookie-cutter McMansions with perfect lawns and residents who measured their worth in property values and appearances. They tried again and again to pressure me into selling, sending glossy brochures and making offers that were little more than insults wrapped in formality. But I held firm. This wasn't just my home, it was my family's legacy. And no developer or slick-talking lawyer was going to take that from me. Rebecca Winters, though, wasn't content to play nice. When she became HOA president, she made it her mission to fix the farm problem. Her right-hand man, Gerald Thompson, a retired corporate lawyer with a silver tongue and a condescending smile, would show up at my door pretending to be helpful. He once left a pamphlet for retirement communities on my porch, with a sticky note saying, "Think of yourself for once." I didn't need their pity or their offers. What I needed was for them to leave us alone. But Rebecca and Gerald didn't see heritage. They saw opportunity. And while I was caring for Emily, they struck. I stood in the soft dirt of my eastern field that night, the faint scent of diesel and crushed crops still hanging in the air. The train's red and white cars gleamed mockingly under the moonlight as they rolled along the fresh-cut tracks that carved straight through my land. Rows of sweet corn that should have been harvested in 2 weeks were gone, churned up and flattened beneath steel and concrete. My fists clenched at my sides, but anger wasn't enough. I needed a way to fight back. Yet standing there, watching that ridiculous tourist train make its test runs across what used to be my best soil, I couldn't shake the hollow weight in my chest. I was losing more than money or crops, I was losing a piece of my grandfather's legacy, and all I had left was a mountain of frustration and no clear path forward. When I returned home that evening, my daughter Emily sat at the kitchen table, pale and still recovering from surgery. She looked at me with hesitant eyes, chewing on her bottom lip. There was something she needed to say, but didn't know how. I pulled out a chair beside her, and after a moment of silence, she finally spoke. While I had been gone, Gerald Thompson had shown up, not at the farm, but at her hospital. He brought flowers and a check for $10,000. His message was clear: tell your father to sell. The nerve of them, to corner my daughter while she was bedridden, recovering, vulnerable. My blood boiled. This wasn't just business or legal lines crossed, this was personal. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Thompson in that hospital room, condescending smile and all, trying to buy my family's silence. The audacity burned hotter than any summer sun that had ever scorched my fields. I knew then that I couldn't just let this go. But fighting them in court would drain me dry, and that's exactly what they were counting on. At 2 a.m, I found myself in the old barn. The metal filing cabinets lining the back wall had been there for decades, their contents carefully catalogued by my grandfather. He always said, land disputes aren't won by fists or arguments. They're won on paper. I pulled open drawer after drawer, rifling through brittle deeds, yellowed survey maps, and thick stacks of correspondence. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that I'd know it when I found it. Hours passed as I traced ink lines on faded blueprints, deciphering notes scribbled in my grandfather's steady hand. Then, buried in the very back of the bottom drawer, I found a folder marked Northeast Corner Dispute 1968. Inside was a hand-drawn surveyor's map annotated by my grandfather himself, along with letters from the county commissioner. My pulse quickened as I studied it. According to those documents, the small wooded parcel where the HOA's headquarters now stood wasn't part of their development at all. It had been mistakenly recorded as such due to a surveying error 50 years ago. My grandfather had noticed the discrepancy but never bothered to fight it. It was just scrubland back then. But now that patch of overlooked dirt was the nerve center of the very people trying to erase my family's history. I sat there in the barn, the old desk lamp buzzing softly, staring at proof that their headquarters, the building from which Rebecca Winters declared war on my farm, was sitting on my land. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Could it really be that simple? Could they have overlooked something this massive? I needed confirmation. I scanned the documents and emailed them to Sam, my lawyer, along with a frantic note explaining what I'd found. I barely slept as I waited for his response. 3 long days passed before my phone finally rang. Sam's voice trembled with excitement. He had spent hours combing through county archives and old property records. My grandfather's documentation held up. Due to that decades-old oversight, the parcel of land under the HOA headquarters legally belonged to me. I sat there, stunned, letting the weight of it settle in. For years they'd bullied me, dismissed me, tried to buy me out. All the while, their fancy headquarters sat on land that was never theirs. But I didn't feel smug satisfaction, not yet. This wasn't just about payback. It was about justice. It was about defending what my grandfather built and making sure his name, and this farm, couldn't be erased by petty tyrants hiding behind manicured lawns and HOA bylaws. Sam warned me to keep quiet until the paperwork could be officially filed and recorded. I agreed. I needed time to think, to plan. I walked out onto the porch that evening, watching the train lights gliding through my darkened field, but this time, something had changed. I wasn't powerless anymore. I had leverage. And soon, they were going to know exactly how it felt to be walked over. The next morning, with the sun just beginning to rise over the eastern field they had scarred, I stood on my porch and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: clarity. The kind of clarity my grandfather used to talk about, when you know exactly what has to be done, and you stop second-guessing yourself. I had the leverage, and it was time to use it. But not recklessly. If there was one thing Grandpa taught me besides how to work the land, it was how to be patient and deliberate. This wasn't about vengeance, it was about teaching them a lesson they'd never forget, the kind that would echo through every pristine lawn and designer living room in Pinecrest. I called Sam first thing and told him I wanted to proceed with filing the corrected survey and establishing my ownership of the parcel under their headquarters. He cautioned me again that even with expedited processing, it could take a few weeks, and we'd need to keep it airtight and quiet. Any leak could give Rebecca Winters a chance to wiggle free or bury us in legal red tape. I promised him discretion. But in truth, my mind was already racing with a plan more elaborate than simply reclaiming what was mine. That same afternoon, I drove into town to see Maggie Jenkins, Director of Veterans Rebuilding America. Maggie had a heart bigger than any barn I'd ever built and the kind of integrity that people felt the moment they met her. My grandfather had supported their charity for years, donating part of every harvest to their pantry. He always said that feeding those who served wasn't charity, it was gratitude in action. I walked into her office, and before she could even finish greeting me, I asked for a private meeting. I told her everything. About the illegal train tracks, the harassment, the destruction of my crops, and the arrogance of Rebecca Winters and her lawyer. But more importantly, I told her what I'd found, that their precious HOA headquarters sat on land that belonged to my family. Maggie sat in stunned silence for a moment before shaking her head and letting out a slow whistle. "Henry," she said, "are you telling me you could take their building right out from under them?" I nodded. And then I told her my plan. I wanted to donate that building to Veterans Rebuilding America. Her eyes widened, and she covered her mouth with her hand. "We've been desperate for space," she whispered. "Commercial rent downtown's gone through the roof. But are you sure? You could sell that land for a fortune." I shook my head. "This isn't about money," I told her. "It's about legacy. It's about standing up to bullies and showing this community what real strength looks like. My grandfather would have wanted this." She didn't argue. She simply reached across the table and shook my hand. The next few days were a whirlwind of quiet, careful preparation. Sam worked around the clock to get the paperwork filed with the county. He called in favors with the clerk's office to fast-track the title correction. I reached out to Jack Harris, the locksmith who had helped me secure the farm years ago after a rash of equipment thefts. I told him I'd need him on standby early one Saturday morning, and I'd explain everything when the time came. But the plan wasn't just legal and logistical. It needed flair. It needed to be public, undeniable, and humiliating. So I started digging through Pinecrest's HOA bylaws, a dense, dry pile of legal text that Rebecca had thrown in my face more times than I could count. Hours into the reading, buried in Section 12, Paragraph 7, I found what I needed. The HOA was required to conduct all official business from its registered headquarters, no exceptions longer than 14 days. Without that building, they couldn't legally function. 2 nights later, I received a text from a neighbor, Linda Parker. She'd always been quietly sympathetic and had passed me a copy of those bylaws. "You won't believe this," the text read. Attached was a photo from the grand opening of Pinecrest's Heritage Center, the one connected by the illegal train running across my field. The exhibit plaque credited the land and the farm's history to the Willoughby family, founding contributors to Pinecrest's legacy. My family's history, my grandfather's sacrifices, erased and replaced by a convenient lie. I sat there in my living room, fists clenched so tightly my knuckles ached. This wasn't just overreach. It was erasure. I spent the rest of that night on my porch, staring at the horizon, listening to the soft creak of crickets and the occasional rattle of that cursed train on its test runs. I felt no anger anymore, only cold resolve. They had tried to take my land, my family's story, and even attempted to manipulate my daughter. Now they were going to learn what happened when you pushed too far. By the end of the week, with every piece of my plan falling into place, I placed the final order, a large, custom banner. Bold red letters on white canvas, "Future Home of Veterans Rebuilding America." Underneath it, the words, "In honor of Walter Miller, farmer, soldier, and community steward." I arranged for the local newspaper's photographer to accidentally pass by that Saturday morning. The stage was set. All that remained was execution. Saturday morning arrived with a heavy stillness, the kind that settles over the land just before a thunderstorm breaks loose. But today, the storm wasn't in the sky, it was on the ground, and I was standing at its center. At 6 sharp, I parked in front of the HOA headquarters, the same smug building they'd used to wage their little war against my family. Jack Harris was already there, tools in hand and a knowing grin on his face. He didn't ask questions, just went to work changing the locks with the efficiency of someone who knows he's part of something bigger than himself. Beside me stood Deputy Morales, a sheriff's deputy I'd known for years. He reviewed the certified paperwork Sam had filed with the county just 2 days prior. The seal was fresh, the ink still crisp. Morales looked up at me after reading it twice. "This is airtight, Henry," he said quietly. "You really want to go through with this?" I nodded. "They made their choices," I replied, watching Jack finish the last lock. By 8 o'clock, volunteers from Veterans Rebuilding America began arriving in trucks and vans, carrying folding tables, banners, coffee dispensers, and toolkits. Maggie Jenkins climbed out of her pickup and gave me a proud smile. Within minutes, the front lawn was buzzing with activity. volunteers in bright blue t-shirts set up American flags along the walkway. They unfurled the banner I'd commissioned, stretching it across the front of the building for all to see. Someone rolled out a red carpet runner from the front door to the parking lot. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. And then, at precisely 9 a.m., Rebecca Winter's black SUV pulled into the parking lot. She braked hard, her eyes fixed on the transformed building. For a moment, she sat frozen, mouth slightly open, before throwing open her door and storming toward us in her sharp navy suit, designer heels sinking into the damp grass with every furious step. Gerald Thompson was only seconds behind, huffing slightly as he tried to keep up, his face already reddening. "What the hell is going on here?" she demanded, her voice cracking under the strain of disbelief and rage. Her eyes darted between the banner, the volunteers, and me standing calmly beside Morales. I handed her the official documentation, watching as her polished veneer cracked even further. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages, scanning faster and faster, until she finally looked up, her face pale and drawn. This can't be real." "It's real, Rebecca," I said evenly. "You built this headquarters on my land. And I've donated it to Veterans Rebuilding America." Gerald snatched the papers from her hands, his expression going from confusion to horror as he recognized the county clerk's seal and Sam's signature. "We'll sue you," he hissed. But the threat lacked teeth, and he knew it. Before Rebecca could spit out another venomous word, 2 security guards in black uniforms stepped forward. She must have hired them as a last-ditch effort to stop what she feared was happening. But the lead guard looked at me and then at Maggie, then squared his shoulders and turned back to Rebecca. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm a veteran. I won't stand in the way of this." He took off his earpiece and walked away, leaving her standing there, humiliated in front of neighbors who were gathering, their morning walks interrupted by the spectacle. The local newspaper photographer arrived just in time, snapping photos of the banner, the volunteers, and Rebecca's ashen face. And then the questions began. "Did you falsify permits for the train, Mrs. Winters?" one reporter asked. Another chimed in, "Why was the farm's history replaced by the fictional Willoughby family at the Heritage Center?" Rebecca's composure shattered completely. "No comment," she barked, but the damage was done. Linda Parker, standing quietly among the crowd, stepped forward. "Is it true you used HOA funds for personal renovations, Rebecca?" Her voice rang clear and strong. A murmur rippled through the gathered homeowners. Gerald tugged on Rebecca's arm, whispering furiously, but she yanked her arm away. "It was for the good of the community," she shouted, eyes wild and darting. "For the good of your kitchen backsplash, maybe," someone from the crowd muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Laughter, sharp, bitter, and cathartic, broke out among the residents. As Rebecca and Gerald retreated, the crowd's attention shifted to Maggie, who was already explaining the veterans' mission and how this building would serve those who had served. People listened, nodding, asking questions, and offering help. The mood shifted from outrage to inspiration, and for the first time in a long while, Pinecrest felt like a community instead of a dictatorship. Rebecca's SUV peeled out of the lot in a spray of gravel, but the sound was drowned out by applause as the first flag was raised above the building. The place where power and arrogance once reigned now belonged to something far greater. The days that followed felt like a season changing overnight. Word of Rebecca Winter's public humiliation spread like wildfire through Pinecrest. By Sunday morning, a petition calling for her resignation had gathered more than enough signatures, and an emergency board meeting was held at Linda Parker's house, because, of course, they no longer had an official headquarters. I wasn't invited, but Linda kept me updated. The board was in chaos. Half of them were threatening to quit, and the other half were frantically scrambling to distance themselves from Rebecca and Gerald. It didn't take long for the full truth to surface. Not only had Rebecca falsified permits for that train line, but an internal audit revealed she'd diverted HOA funds for a luxury kitchen remodel, imported Italian marble countertops, and landscaping upgrades that none of the board had approved. The fallout was swift and merciless. Gerald Thompson resigned, his reputation in tatters, and I later heard whispers that the State Bar Association was investigating him for professional misconduct. On Tuesday morning, I received a call from Linda, now officially appointed as interim HOA president. Her voice was steady, but there was a note of humility in it that hadn't been there before. "Henry," she began, "we owe you more than an apology. What the previous administration did was inexcusable." She asked if I'd be willing to meet with the remaining board members to find a way forward. We sat down that afternoon around her dining room table, and I laid out my terms. First, a binding acknowledgement that my farm would never be subjected to HOA regulations, now or in the future. Second, the natural boundary between my land and Pine Crest would be legally designated as a protected heritage agricultural zone, never to be developed or encroached upon. And third, every dollar of rent the HOA paid to lease a small conference room in the Veterans Building would be matched by an equal donation to Veterans Rebuilding America. The board agreed without hesitation. Within days, crews arrived to dismantle the train track, carefully restoring my field to its original condition. They compensated me for the destroyed crops at fair market value, this time with genuine apologies. By the end of the month, the veterans had moved into their new headquarters, and the HOA quietly occupied a modest meeting room in the back. It didn't stop there. Residents who once turned their noses up at my farm began stopping by to ask questions, offer help, or just shake my hand. Linda proposed starting a community garden along the border between Pine Crest and my fields, and I agreed. On the first day of planting, more than 20 neighbors showed up with shovels, seeds, and their children in tow. Veterans worked alongside residents, swapping stories, teaching skills, and turning the once divisive fence line into a symbol of unity. Rebecca? I heard she moved to a condo downtown. No HOA. No control. No one to intimidate. Gerald has disappeared from public view altogether. The train cars were donated to the Children's Museum, where they now educate kids about agriculture and transportation, a fitting twist of irony. Linda recently asked me to join their new community relations committee. I agreed on one condition: every meeting would include cookies from my grandmother's recipe. Some traditions are too sweet to lose. As I walk my fields now, the crops growing tall once more, the fence between my land and Pine Crest still stands, but the gates swing open both ways. My grandfather's legacy not only survived but became the heart of a stronger community. Sometimes, standing your ground does more than protect your land. It plants seeds for something better. Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below. Let's see who had it worse.